these huge institutes and systems, they are built to drive profit. They could care less about healthcare outcomes. Clearly, the Women's Health Initiative is a prime example. Treating the root cause, the hormone imbalance that could, you know, prevent and take people off of all these medications. I mean, let's talk about it, right? Antidepressants. When your estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone drop, we're going to see conditions like depression, low mood, irritability. Estrogen therapy alone can reduce risk of depression by 60% for the early adopters.
What if I told you that the same mindset that builds championship teams also builds an extraordinary life? The same discipline that drives elite performance to greatness is the discipline that unlocks a longer, stronger, and more resilient future. This is where peak health meets peak performance, where we explore the science of longevity and the mindset of greatness. Because your legacy isn't just what you leave behind, it's what you show up with every single day. This is the Legacy and Longevity Podcast. I'm Zach Dansell, your host.
Up until this point, right, everything that we've been talking about, the timing hypothesis, the Women's Health Initiative, all of that was really just derived around estrogen and progesterone, right, which obviously are critical hormones, for hormone therapy when it comes to women. But I think one of the other things that is completely misunderstood, and most people, most women, when we tell them, even men, when we talk about the abundance of testosterone that are in women, it is the most abundant hormone, sex hormone at least, in women. It is just as critical of a hormone to focus on and balance for optimal health and longevity than any of the others. So I think it'd be a good time to transition to that, right? I love the fact that the news is getting all this attention towards the FDA removing the black box warning, for these menopause treatments for women. But again, that is just around estrogen. And you mentioned it earlier that, there's over, I don't know, 1730 approved applications for men with low testosterone, but yet there is zero for women. So let's talk a little bit more about that, right? The most misunderstood hormone when it comes to women is testosterone.
Literally the most misunderstood hormone for women is testosterone. And you said it, but I just want to highlight it, which is the fact that it is the most abundant hormone for women, right? So not talking about it is malpractice, in my opinion. I know that's a strong statement, but you can't talk about hormone balance without talking in women, without talking about testosterone. Because it's bigger than hot flashes and night sweats, everybody. It's bigger than that, right? Testosterone is so critical for so many different things. And I'll talk about that in a minute here, what are the benefits of testosterone. But the biggest thing to understand is that women have testosterone too. That's where we have to start. I think a lot of people, average, not like a lay person that doesn't have medical training, would be shocked to know that testosterone is just as abundant, is super abundant in women and critical.
Yeah. I mean, it's critical for mood, metabolism, sexual health, your muscle, strength and recovery, just overall vitality. So, obviously we're talking about, do women actually need testosterone, right? So talk to us a little bit more about how that affects us on a day to day, and especially as we age, right? Because this isn't directly tied to perimenopause or menopause, because it can start much earlier than that.
Yeah. And if you're on birth control, I promise you have a testosterone deficiency, because birth control depletes testosterone, right? So yeah, I mean, that it's a good conversation to have. I think the biggest topics that I want to make sure people know around testosterone is that, one, it's abundant in women. In fact, most people are shocked to know that women produce 3 to 4 times more testosterone than they do estrogen, right? So it has to be part of the conversation. It's so important for energy, for metabolism, for brain function, for sexual health, obviously. And then long term, massive cardioprotective benefits, brain health benefits, to prevention around neurocognitive decline, all kinds of stuff. And we'll get into that. But it is an incredibly important hormone. It's not just a male hormone. So when do we start seeing it lower? To be honest, I I see it at all kinds of crazy ages. I would say the average woman, early 30s, it starts to really, really go. But again, that's just general. Let's say you have like your early 20, mid 20s year old female, and they've been on birth control since they were 14, because that's very common, right? Meanwhile, depleting all of their hormones throughout that whole period of time that they're on birth control. Let's say they're eating an average, and well, maybe not for you, but when I was in college, an average college diet, they're not eating well. They're drinking a lot, so they're having tons of endocrine disruption, right? That path towards testosterone depletion is going to happen much sooner for that type of person versus someone who's eating well, not on birth control, exercising, doing all the things.
Let's talk about birth control, because I think this is, obviously it's a touchy subject. We're not here to tell anybody what they should or shouldn't do, but we are here to help educate and give you the information for you to go out and make the decision what's best for you. But in fact, right, birth control has a dramatic impact on your hormones. And I think one of the things that is missed in today's society, when these young 14-year-old girls are going to their doctor and being prescribed a birth control, the doctors aren't educating them on the profound effects that it will actually have on the impact of their hormones. So let's talk a little bit more of exactly what is happening when on a birth control to your hormones.
Honestly, this is my favorite topic because I am a mom of three, and two of those three are females, and one of those three is 15. Right? So it's a big topic, and to your point, it is controversial. And I want to acknowledge a couple pieces of that before we kind of dive into the hormone aspect, right? So let's just kind of talk about birth control and like in its entirety. One is that, from a women's rights standpoint, right, to have the right over birth control and just the ability to control that. That is a conversation that has to be had here. I think that, ultimately the choice as to whether you go on birth control or not should be your personal choice as a woman. You should have autonomy to make that choice. But I think what you're trying to do, and I respect it, is bring informed consent into the conversation. Because what's happening is these girls that are 12, 13, 14, first of all, we're starting periods earlier than we ever have in the history of the human race, right? So you have these really young girls starting periods in middle school and earlier than that. And what happens is let's say they have an irregular period, a heavy period, which, by the way, there's a million things that can cause that we can treat. But what will happen is that person will go to their OB-GYN, right? And that OB-GYN will say, well, we'll treat it by putting you on birth control. Well, I think the most important thing for people to understand is that you're not treating anything when you're on birth control. Birth control is doing nothing but completely shutting down the menstrual cycle, right? So it is treating it in the sense that it's shutting it down so you don't have symptoms. But then what ends up happening is, to your point, there's a lack of informed consent. These girls that are 12, 13, 14, I mean, their parents don't even get all the information, let alone them as the actual patient, right? I don't know if, when I was 12, 13, 14, I just did what I was told to do, because that's what you do at 12, 13, and 14, right? But that piece of the conversation is completely missing. Why are we prescribing birth control? What we're doing is shutting down the menstrual cycle. We're not treating anything or controlling anything. We're shutting it down. And then also, what impact does that have to your hormones long term? So I think that's a big part of this is just not making space for that conversation and not giving informed consent. And then, what happens long term is then, and I used to see this all the time, that girl that got put on birth control when they were 11, 12 years old, right? Their menstrual cycle never got up and running in its entirety, right? It had little fits and starts. You might have had like some periods, irregular periods, heavy periods, but it never became like a real regular cycle because it got shut down from birth control from the jump. So then these poor women that are then in their late 20s, early 30s, honestly, now even late 30s, early 40s, women are having babies later. Those women want to then come off birth control and try to get pregnant. And this is part of the massive infertility discussion and challenge that we're having in this country, is that these women have been on birth control for 20, 30 years, never really had a menstrual cycle that got up and running. They're getting bombarded with constant endocrine disruptors in the meantime, right? Plastics and pollutants and pesticides and poor food and lack of exercise and alcohol and all these things. And then they come up with this birth control and then they can't get pregnant. Right. So it is a very big conversation. I think it's massively lacking informed consent. I think OB-GYNs are doing a disservice to people when they're not having these conversations and not educating themselves on what do hormones do? What does this birth control do in the body, right? All birth control is synthetic hormones. So we already talked about this earlier. All birth control is going to promote inflammation. Period.
So let's break down when someone is taking birth control. Which hormones are being shut down? Which ones are being increased, and how that's overall affecting the hormone balance of the female.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in general, they're impacting all hormones, right? So they're impacting testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone. There's a lot of different. That's a big question. I don't know if I get super into the weeds with that, Zach, but generally, these hormones, right? These birth control pills, you can have combination pills. You can have estrogen only. You can have progesterone only, right? So it just kind of depends on which one you're taking. Are you taking a pill? Are you taking a shot? Are you doing an IUD? There's a lot of different versions, but the bottom line is that they will deplete testosterone, they will deplete estrogen, and they will create massive imbalance. And it's that imbalance that just drives and fuels inflammation and chronic disease. So I think that's the main point to understand about birth control, is that it's not healing or treating anything. It's shutting everything down, and it's creating hormone imbalance because of the impact it has on your hormones.
Yeah. Okay. So hopping back to just how critical the benefits of testosterone for women, right? We just discussed that birth control has the ability to deplete you of testosterone, especially at a young age, where females are still going through the developmental phases. So let's talk and really bullet out the benefits of testosterone, right? We have the benefit of healthy metabolism and weight. How testosterone is improving insulin sensitivity, helping with the burning of visceral fat, and just overall supporting a healthy body composition. What would you say? Give me what you would think is the one of the next big critical bullet points.
Yeah, I can dive into. I want to add something to what you just said, because I personally think this is probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, impact of testosterone is on this metabolism and weight. And it's doing this because of its impact on glucose metabolism.
Yeah.
Right. So testosterone directly impacts the ability of your body to take that sugar from your food, right, and take it into your muscle into your cells to create energy and do all that. Right. That is what testosterone does. And so when you start to lose testosterone, in the early 30s, late 20s, that's when you start to, if you watch, and you and I have had the privilege of just seeing thousands and thousands of patients' labs, right? What will happen almost all the time is you start to see that HbA1c start to creep up, right? So that's that marker we talked about earlier, the hemoglobin A1c that measures your average blood sugar the last 3 months. Most women, that starts to creep up in the early to mid 30s, right? So like you were always a 5.0, no problems, I'm good to go. And all of a sudden you're 5.2, and then a 5.3, and then a 5.5, right? And modern medicine doesn't intervene until you're diabetic. So they don't care about any of that, right? They just go exercise and, work out more, eat less is going to be their advice. But what's happening is, because of whatever, birth control, these environmental factors, aging, etc., stress, right? We've lost this testosterone. So we've lost this ability to effectively utilize our glucose for energy production. And so what ends up happening is we put it on and we store it as fat, and specifically belly fat, right? And it just kind of gets out of control from there. And then you and I know the impact of blood sugar dysregulation. I say this all the time. Blood sugar dysregulation is probably one of the most, if not the most, inflammatory processes in the body, right? When your blood sugar is all over the place like that, and it's up and down and up and down and up and down, right? And it's not well regulated, that creates a boatload of chaos in the body, right? And tons of inflammation that will eventually put you at risk for things like cancer, not just obesity, but cancer. I mean, that's what the end game for that. But outside of, that glucose metabolism and just, metabolic health, healthy weight, testosterone is important for so much more, right? Muscle tone and strength. How many women do you know? I know so many women, right, in their 40s, they're just on the treadmill endlessly, like walking or mildly jogging, and wondering why they can't put on muscle. Or they are trying to lift weights, but they just can't like get up in weight, and they can't build the muscle. And again, they don't have the testosterone. They don't have enough testosterone to actually put that muscle on and keep it on, specifically that lean muscle, right? So you need testosterone, just like for men. Men have testosterone for muscle. Women need testosterone for muscle.
Yeah, and obviously lean muscle mass is critical for longevity. If there's one thing that um, has the biggest driver in longevity is going to be lean muscle mass. So obviously, having testosterone to be able to put on that lean muscle mass to gain strength, to be able to lift heavier weights. Don't just sit there on the treadmill every day and expecting um, those things to work itself out, because you have to lift weights, right? You have to focus on that muscle strength and lean muscle mass if longevity is something that's important to you. Um, so then talk to us about the benefit of testosterone when it comes to just brain and mood.
Yeah. So I always think of the way I always describe it to people is testosterone is like that vitality molecule, right? It's the thing that it gets you going, it gets you motivated, it gets you psyched to do something, it gets you focused and honed in. I mean, that's really what testosterone does, right? So that motivation piece, the ability to really like hone in and get something done. When you don't have enough testosterone, the things you feel are brain fog, right? Lack of focus, lack of motivation. I don't really care about this. I don't really want to do that. That's low testosterone, right? When you have this kind of like low grade mood and just no matter what, you can't improve it, right? Or there's no impact on, nothing's touching it. That can be low testosterone. So when you finally replenish and replete the depletion and you actually put the testosterone back, you come to life in the brain, right? You all of a sudden you can think better. You're motivated to get to the gym, right? It's no longer like you're dragging yourself against every ounce of willpower you have, right? Like you're ready to go. And then when you get there, you're able to pick up the weight and not have the injury and build the muscle. And then, that progressive overload, getting heavier with the weights instead of, buckling under a 10-pound bicep curl, right? There's so much you can do with that long term if you keep it up. Outside of brain and mood, though, I mean, obviously, we talked earlier about sexual health, and we talked about it from the perspective of estrogen. So, when you have low estrogen, you have less vaginal lubrication, more painful sex, right? More risk for infections, all that stuff. But with testosterone, testosterone is going to give you the ability to, have an orgasm, have more intense orgasms, have the desire to have sex. How many people do you know get divorces in their 40s and 50s? I mean, so many, right? And this is a big part of it that we're just not talking about, right? As a man, your sex drive is always going to be is going to be going no matter what, right? And so as a woman, if you can't meet that, or if you just don't have the drive anymore, then what happens? And relationships start to fall apart because you're not connected anymore. You're not having that sexual connection that's so critical for relationships, right? And so then that leads to the big D word, and that's not fun for people. um Anti-inflammatory and recovery, right? So testosterone, I know I always uh anytime I think about like the anti-inflammatory effects of testosterone, I think of personally about the first time I got a pellet. And I vividly remember like maybe 2 weeks after getting that pellet, all the pain in my joints just went away. Like every little, and it wasn't that I was having debilitating pain. It's I'm active, I exercise, I do all the things, but I just felt like a lightness about me, right? And that's what testosterone does. It reduces systemic inflammation. It helps to improve recovery after exercise and recovery from like stressful periods in life. It just in general helps keep pain under control. And then finally, bone health, right? So we talked about bone health from the perspective of estrogen. But testosterone and estrogen are incredibly important for bone health, right? Testosterone lays the bone down and estrogen builds it up essentially. And so when you lose both as a woman, that is a double whammy. And that is why women have so much osteoporosis. If you look at men, they don't have that same impact. Even when they're hypogonadal and have low testosterone, they still in general have more testosterone than women. And so that keeps that ability to put bone down. So they have less risk for that osteoporosis. But it's incredibly important for bone density, bone health long term.
Yeah, so I mean, it sounds like the bottom line, testosterone is critical. It's a hormone that both women and men should have. It is the hormone of drive, your mental drive, physical drive, your metabolic drive, and your sexual drive. So I think, that it's like I said earlier. Love the fact that there's publicity getting out there about the estrogen and the benefits of estrogen. The next big thing needs to be testosterone. And I think that's also catching a wave because we're seeing more people out there also hopping on to, doing testosterone replacement therapy for women, not just for men. So kind of just recap, right? Why so many women end up with testosterone, with low testosterone, which we hit on, right? There's a natural decline that happens in late 20s, early 30s. Obviously, it's subjective, just depending on the person's life and lifestyle. Birth control can drastically and dramatically suppress testosterone. Chronic stress, right, increases HBG, sex hormone binding globulin, which binds on to our free testosterone, right? We can drive up total testosterone all we want, but if we don't have our testosterone free, then we're not going to get the full benefits of having testosterone. Perimenopause and menopause obviously is going to cause further decline as our body begins to age. And then obviously, just like everything else, right? Just the modern lifestyle.
Right.
We can do all the right things when it comes to optimizing hormones, but if you have poor sleep, if you're not eating a nutritious, high protein diet, if you're constantly in stress, right? If you're not moving, you're constantly sedentary, right? Just having those poor lifestyle factors, right, is also going to play a role and expedite the process of just the decline of all hormones.
Yep. Yep.
Moving on to hormone replacement therapy, right?
Yeah.
We talked about the risks of low estrogen, the risks of low testosterone. We talked about the benefits of optimized estrogen and optimized testosterone. So it's all fine and dandy to talk about those things, right? But how do people actually safely replace hormones or testosterone?
Yeah. The thing about hormone replacement therapy is it's not as simple as people are making it out to be on social media, right? And so it's really important that you work with somebody that has experience in this space, that is going from, evidence-based protocols, that is testing your labs regularly to see how things are shifting. And I don't just mean sex hormone labs, right? If you're working with a provider and the only labs that they're looking at on a recurring basis are your sex hormones, then that's missing the mark, right? We have to look at how is this impacting everything else? How is this impacting, inflammation status? How is this impacting overall liver health, kidney health, nutrient status, cardiovascular health, everything. We have to look at everything. So I think that's a big part of it. I think, making sure that you're having more than a 5-minute conversation. There's a lot of these clinics that are popping up that are doing hormone replacement that are having, 15-minute consults and you're getting a prescription. There is no way you are doing I can tell you this, Zach, there's no way you are doing a comprehensive hormone assessment in 15 minutes. There's just no way, right? And this is part of why this doesn't work in the conventional system, right? In the conventional insurance-based medical system, doctors don't have the luxury of spending an hour with somebody or even a half an hour with somebody and really going over all these nuances that you and I have spoken about, right? And so, it just cannot be done in a 15-minute appointment or 5-minute appointment, right? So you got to work with experts. You got to work with people that have been in this space for a while, right? Not people that are just kind of stumbling into it now. I think that's what I love about our clinical team is that, we all these providers, myself, we've all been working at this for over a decade, and we have evidence-based protocols written and we work from those protocols, and if you're going to a provider that, the only thing that they're looking at is your serum level of total testosterone and they're treating based off that or same with estrogen or whatever, then they have no clue what hormone replacement really entails, right? There's so much more to it than just a serum level on a lab, on the lab work. And this is why you're starting to see, I want to talk about pellets because for us, our absolute preferred method of delivery for hormones, no matter what form, testosterone or estrogen, is a pellet. And this is controversial because there's a lot of people that are very anti-pellets, right? And they think it's just too much, too fast, too big of a dose, too scary. You can't take it out, blah, blah, blah. Well, all those people have that fear because they don't know how to use pellets, right? They don't have the training. They don't have the education. They don't have the experience. They don't have the, the knowledge and wherewithal to do it. I think it's important to talk about pellets because, there's a lot of people out there that are poo-pooing pellets and they're not big fans of pellets because they think, once you put it in, it's in, you can't take it out. And what if we get to crazy high dosages and blah, blah, blah. But that's really just telling me that you as a clinician, if you're kind of spouting that fear, that you don't really know how to manage pellet therapy and you don't really understand how to manage hormone replacement therapy using that type of delivery.
Right.
Because if you really just kind of sit back and look at the whole landscape, as a clinician, what are my tools in my tool belt that I can prescribe for hormones? I can do for women, right? The safe ones we'll hone in on, right? So I can do the creams. I can do injections, right? But they're not as effective and they come with a lot of issues and just compliance and all that stuff, right? So I can do creams and I can do pellets, right? Those are my two best methods. We have to talk about efficacy of both, right? So with creams, I'm being generous and I'm going to say they absorb 20 to 30%, but that's being generous, right? So it's a daily application. You got to rotate sites so you don't oversaturate your receptors. You know, you do have to worry about transference, right? So like if you apply that cream and you pick up your baby, you can transfer it, right? Not saying they don't have a place. I do think they can be beneficial, and I think as long as they're dosed appropriately, they can produce benefit. But they're not as well absorbed, right? But people that are newer in the space and don't have that experience and don't have that, that kind of like badge on their wall, right? That's going to be the thing they go with because it's just the easiest to control, even though it's not the best absorbed. But pellets, so a pellet really, if you've never heard of that as a listener, right? If you've never heard about that procedure, they basically look like little tic tacs. We can do testosterone, we can do estrogen, and it's a quick and office procedure. We just use a local numbing, a little bit of lidocaine. We numb the area, and there's a special little device that allows us to put the trocars right into the tissue in the glute. And then you're putting your testosterone, and if you need an estrogen in there. And then, it's a very small incision. So we don't need any kind of stitches or anything. You just steri strip it and just avoid picking up heavy things and taking a bath for a couple of days and you're good to go. And then what happens is that those pellets are right in that area physically, right by your ovaries where they normally would be producing these hormones. And so as the blood passes by the pellet, it picks up the hormones that it needs, it distributes it systemically, and you get a really, really nice, steady release of hormones over the next 3 to 6 months, depending on, your gender and your dose. I think people get scared about them if they don't know how to properly dose them, right?
Yeah.
Now, and for us, we always do for proper monitoring, right? We always do labs, after 4 weeks after that pellet. That's when we're going to reach that like peak therapeutic level. We're going to actually be able to see that number. And, we are shooting to get higher than the normal range for testosterone. And that's a topic we have to talk about because a lot of women are scared to have slightly higher testosterone than what that range at LabCorp says, which I think is like 10 to 70 or something, which is just crazy. Right. So like if I have a testosterone of 12, they would say that's normal. That's absolutely insane. Right. That's not enough testosterone. So, I think it's all of those things. Take all those things into consideration when you're evaluating those labs post pellet. It's not just the number on the lab. It's also understanding that is a serum testosterone level that tells me nothing about what's actually getting into the cell and being used on a functional level. Right. So that is a very important point that a lot of doctors don't understand in terms of testosterone replacement. You can't just look at the serum level. It's what's being actually used in the cell.
Yeah, I mean, you can't just look at the serum level, but also you can't just look at the reference ranges that are put on LabCorp, right? Because, I think there's studies out that say basically 95% of the population is metabolically unhealthy, and over 70% of the population is either overweight or obese, right? So if we're taking, the reference ranges on LabCorp, right, are just the general population ranges, for that population group. So if we're saying that the average population, more than the average, right, 70% is either overweight or obese, or 95% of the population is metabolically unhealthy, then we can't sit there and say these are normal ranges when
Right.
those people are sick, right? So, obviously, this comes to the expertise, right? Where you are working with the provider who has, the optimal ranges, not just the normal reference ranges that LabCorp puts on their sheets, right? There's those normal reference ranges. There's the functional medicine, the optimal ranges. Part of the scenario that you're saying that some providers are afraid of pellets because they don't know the dosing, right? Well, that's also another important thing of going with someone who's experienced, right? Where we have 12 years of experience where we have built our proprietary dosing calculator, right? Where we're taking all these different lifestyle factors, medical history, different markers, lab markers to then put into this calculator to help our providers get the exact dose that is needed for that specific individual, right? And everyone's dose is going to be different. It's going to be very unique. Where we're making sure that we are delivering the best possible outcomes at the safest delivery route. Um, Another thing that I think is a huge differentiator and going with someone who's experienced, right, is the procedure itself, right? Dr. Lloyd was a former OBGYN for over 40 years. He has that procedure experience where, he was an innovator when he was an OBGYN who came up with multiple procedures, techniques that, the industry is using today, where he kind of just took that knowledge and that experience. And he also, came here. We have a very different uh, pellet procedure method than anybody else. And I think we probably deal with the least amount of side effects, the least amount of extrusions, uh, to where again it comes down to that expertise, that knowledge, that experience of working with someone who truly knows what they're doing when it comes to not just hormone therapy, but in particular, the gold standard when it comes to hormone replacement therapy is pellets, right? Without a doubt, hands down. Um, there is no arguing to that, and those who are arguing don't know what they're talking about. Before we continue, I want to share something deeply personal, the real reason my family started Nava Health. Over a decade ago, my mom was on her deathbed. Her organs were failing, and the doctors told us there was nothing they could do except keep her comfortable. In that moment, everything changed. We realized traditional medicine had limits, especially when it came to proactive and preventative root cause medicine built for long term health span and lifespan. At Nava Health, we take a data driven precision approach to longevity. We test over 90 biomarkers to uncover exactly what's happening inside your body, and we build a personalized plan designed around your unique biology. Because fatigue, brain fog, weight gain, they're not random, they're signals. And when you listen, your body can heal. This is functional longevity medicine done right, comprehensive, proactive, and built to help you feel and perform your best at any age. Go to navacenter.com and take control of your health today. Now back to the show.
I have to give Dr. DeRosa credit where credit's due, because I like the way that she has like a metaphor and an analogy for this. She kind of talks about pellet therapy versus other forms of hormone preparations as having like color TV versus black and white. It's like the pellets. Once you get a pellet, you're in color TV. It's so hard to go back to black and white TV. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you get that benefit, and and we see it all the time. Again, this it's great to have all the studies to prove all the things, right? And we have all that, but we also have the experience, right? Which is we've treated over 60,000 patients. We've probably, I think you and I calculated it once, and I don't remember, we've done six figures in terms of numbers of pellet procedures over the years.
Oh, yeah.
Like it matters to have that kind of expertise, because again, and I just want to keep coming back to this, it's so much bigger than just looking at what their serum number is and figuring out what their pellet dose should be and putting that pellet in. It's so much bigger than that. It requires the conversations, the when we're reviewing those labs and we're having post pellet conversations with clients. What are you feeling? What are your benefits, right? Are you having an improved, mood, motivation, libido? Are you putting on muscle? Are you all of a sudden, not having vaginal dryness? Are you having, better sex and less painful sex? Is your brain on again? Are you losing weight? Are you feeling good, right? And then if they are having any side effects, which to be honest will be minimal, right? The main side effects for folks are going to maybe a little bit of chin hair, right? So if that's the case, let's assess that. Let's see how bad that is. Are you having some acne? Let's assess that. You see how bad it is. I think a lot of folks think that women that are taking testosterone, no matter what the level, they're going to come out like big and bulky and like men, and they're going to be raging and all these. And it's just, that is not accurate.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I mean,
At
I
all.
think that's, we were just talking about testosterone, and a lot of, women, question, is it, safe, right? In terms of breast cancer or cardiovascular long-term health. And one of the doctors, Dr. Lord, and, some of the others like to reference all the time is, Dr. Rebecca Glazier, and some of the studies that she's done, both over a 10-year and 15-year prospective, cohort studies, where she showed, a 47% reduction in invasive breast cancer incidences. Right. So it's, I think she even showed in those studies that testosterone appears to have that anti-proliferative effect on breast tissue
On
and
breast cancer cells. Yeah.
yeah, on breast cancer cells. Sorry. Um, so I think, there's so much information out there. There's so many studies that have been, they've been out there for providers. They've been out there for consumers, right? But you know, again, just to kind of a reminder of the day and age that we live in, right? This 22 years, we've been held captive to this medical dogma of hormones are dangerous, right? I have to think, because we've been up 15 of those 22 years that now has been around, we've been saying that it's false, right? I have to think there a lot more people who were smart enough to see this a long time ago, right? And so I kind of want to talk about a little bit why it took so long, right, for you know the current administration, RFK Jr. to really push forward, um, to bring down this black box warning, right? To really go back and look at the data and the studies, even though it's it's been looked at plenty of times. These keeps, the keeps study, the elite studies, these were done back in 2012, 2016, right? Where we knew this information, we had this information, yet for so long, we allowed women to suffer from this life-changing, life-saving therapy, right? So I just want to, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, right? Uh, I'm a realist. I'd like to call it straight. It is what it is. Um, but I want to remind people, right, of some of the most largest pronounced institutes and corporations, like insurance companies, like big pharma, some of the big, federal government agencies like the FDA. You know, that means that they would have had to have come forward, which they just, the FDA did, and admit that they got it wrong, right? That's the first thing. But also want to remind people to also follow the money,
There it is. I was gonna say, follow the money, brother.
right?
That's how you're gonna do. Yep.
Follow the money, right? You might ask why all these years it's just coming to light now, even though a long time ago we've known this. Follow the money. Some of the most common drugs that are prescribed to women for symptoms that are really because of a hormonal imbalance when they're going through perimenopause or menopause, um, are some of the largest drug industries in the world, right? Antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, stimulants, sleep meds, bone health and osteoporosis drugs, metabolic drugs like GLP-1s, cardiovascular drugs for blood pressure, arrhythmia drugs, anti-inflammatory drugs, right? If we really want to go into that, right, we're talking about hundreds of billions a year in these industries, right?
If you follow the money and you get into medication management of symptoms that are actually due to menopause, right? There's a boatload of money in those sections of in those different categories of pharmaceuticals that you just mentioned, right? So the antidepressants, the anti-anxiety meds, sleep meds, bisphosphonates for osteoporosis, and et cetera down the line. There's a million meds, right? That's one thing to pay attention to, and I think you and I should deep dive that together. The second thing, though, to pay attention to is all the societies that come up with the standards of care for the providers, for the medical doctors, right? A lot of that is determined and brought forth by the pharmaceutical companies. So the pharmaceutical companies fund the societies, right? So like your endocrine societies and all that stuff that come up with the standards of care, so that when you show up to the doctor and you say, I feel XYZ, they say do ABC,
Yeah.
right? That's all predetermined. It's all very algorithmic. But again, it's coming from a place of follow the money, right?
Follow
So
the
if we
money.
break, yep,
Yeah, follow the money. The these huge institutes and systems, they are built to drive profit. They could care less about healthcare outcomes. Clearly, the Women's Health Initiative is a prime example. Treating the root cause, the hormone imbalance that could, you know, prevent and take people off of all these medications. I mean, let's talk about it, right? Antidepressants. When your estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone drop, we're going to see conditions like depression, low mood, irritability. Estrogen therapy alone can reduce risk of depression by 60% for the early adopters. You know, the antidepressant industry is doing, anywhere between 18 to 25 billion a year, right? Over 250 million prescriptions a year, where only 15% of people are reporting improvement, right? For drug, I mean, which makes sense, right? Because that's not the root cause, right?
Because the issue is not a neurotransmitter imbalance in the brain,
Correct,
right? The
correct.
issue is the
Which
hormone
which
imbalance.
then being on these medications, have, dramatic side effects and serious side effects, right? Some of the antidepressants, it's supposed to be an antidepressant, but yet one of the side effects is having suicidal thoughts. I mean,
Well, and it's
that
even greater than that,
mind
right?
blowing. A
Yeah,
medication, Steph, that's supposed to help me feel better and happier. It is, one of the main side effects is suicidal thoughts.
it's sad. It's really sad. And like, and that's kind of just like the beginning, right? So like, if you've spoken, again, I've had the privilege of talking to thousands of patients over the years, right? Folks that are on antidepressants, the thing that I see often, and not just speaking to patients, we see this in the research, right? They're not that effective. They're just not that effective. And not only that, but they have all kinds of side effects. Weight gain being a big one, right? So there's that poor perimenopausal woman that's having anxiety and depression. And so they get put on an antidepressant, but they're already upset because they're gaining weight and they can't lose the weight in the midsection. Well, now they're gaining another 15 or 20 pounds because of the antidepressant. Oh, and by the way, the antidepressants deplete nutrients, right? As a lot of medications do. And that's not even part of the discussion. So if you're on antidepressant, you're having nutrient depletion that's worsening, right? And mood issues and things like that, right? You tend to have a lot of apathy, like you just kind of lose your zest for life, and and you'll hear people say this. I actually, this is gonna be a weird reference, but I was listening to Theo Vaughn, it was a podcast the other day, and he was talking about he's been very public about talking about being on antidepressants. And he said that for one of his last specials, like comedy specials, he intentionally weaned himself off of the antidepressant so he could, quote, feel something. I mean, that's really what it's doing to people, is it's just blunting their emotions, depleting their nutrients, creating more inflammation, and not really treating the root of the problem, right?
Yeah.
It's not very
Yeah.
effective.
And then we go
Yeah.
into anti-anxiety meds like benzos, which, just a reminder, the brain is extremely hormone sensitive, right? So when estrogen, progesterone, testosterone shift, the brain neurotransmitters are going to shift with them, right? When estrogen drops, serotonin drops, and anxiety rises. So again, people are being put on these medications, but not necessarily for the root cause, right?
Not for the root cause, and it's missing, and I'm going to pause and just emphasize a little bit more on something you said, which I think was really smart. These are benzodiazepines. Okay. So what is that? These are like the Xanax and the Valium and all those meds that people know about, right? Highly abused, highly addictive, right? They are medications that, if you do get hooked on them, you can't just stop it cold turkey, because that could be fatal, right? You can have seizures and you can die. These are serious medications. And they're not meant, again, they were never developed or intended to be long-term, solutions, air quotes, for anxiety, right? If you're being prescribed Xanax, it's because you really should be using that only for emergency situations, one-off emergency situations. You have a panic attack, you're kind of going off the rails and you need to bring it back in. It should not be used as a daily low dose, like chronic management for anxiety, because you will, within just a couple weeks, even somebody that has no addictive tendencies or anything like that, right? You become dependent on it.
Yeah.
Right. And I think there's not a lot of conversation around that too, right? Similar to the birth control chat we had earlier. When they're being prescribed to these women in their 40s and 50s, they're getting a little, quarter milligram, half a milligram of Xanax prescribed to them. There is no conversation happening from that doctor about, the reliance that you can develop long term, the impact that it's having on brain chemistry long term, and the fact that, by the way, Zach, one of the biggest side effects of those medications is rebound debilitating anxiety. And if you kind of there's a lot of influencers and people in the podcast space and all kinds, they're talking about this, right? It's like, I was on these meds, I wasn't told exactly what I was getting myself into. I tried to stop them because I didn't like the way they make me feel, and I had rebound, raging anxiety. So it's not a solution, it's a band-aid, and it's actually making people worse than it is actually helping them.
Yeah. So then, anti-anxiety medications, it's a $15 billion industry a year. close to 100 million scripts a year. You got your sleep medications, which is another 5 to 8 billion annually. 20 to 30 million scripts a year. Again, doctors aren't educated or trained on the hormone physiology, on how hormones or hormonal imbalance can affect areas like sleep. Just the importance of estrogen and progesterone and testosterone, and how that all plays a factor into sleep. Yet, we're prescribing sleep meds. Again, not treating the root cause. Then we got our bone health and osteoporosis drugs. Right. We know for a fact, as estrogen declines, as testosterone declines, our bones become weaker. Women develop osteoporosis. Um, we know estrogen helps build bones and maintain that bone remodeling. So when we lose it, we're going to have rapid bone loss. We know that proper hormone replacement therapy can reduce the risk of fractures of 30 to 50%. But yet again, we aren't or haven't been prescribing as like the standard of care hormone replacement therapy. They've created this drug that again comes with, side effects that I think you told me the other day actually increase the risk of fracture.
Yeah, long-term bisphosphonate use is no joke. That is a gnarly medication. Yeah, but again, it's like it kind of goes back to everything that you and I are all about, and why Nava is what it is, right? It's that root cause approach to health. Instead of slapping band-aids on symptoms, and I always say it like my analogy I always use is, instead of playing whack-a-mole with symptom management, let's actually test and not guess. Let's actually spend time with people and have genuine conversations about their medical history, their lifestyle, their diet, their sleep, their stress, their exercise. Like, let's spend time with them and get to know people. And then let's actually treat them comprehensively and from the root cause, instead of just throwing all these band-aid solutions that don't actually work and are not, not really treating the root cause.
Exactly. So yeah, so the bone health industry is a 12 to 15 billion-dollar industry. Then you got your metabolic disease drugs, your GLP-1s, 40 to 60 billion, blood pressure medication, cholesterol and statin, $20 billion, right? So, you know, if you kind of just look at that, right, of just what I was just talking about, hormone replacement therapy is a huge threat to big pharma because they're actually fixing the root cause, right? The issues that the entire multi-hundred-billion-dollar a year drug companies are depending on. Hormone replacement therapy is that root cause fix, right? So, we're talking about over 200, $300 billion a year. It's all of which is just downstream symptom management. It's not addressing that root cause that, we work, that we preach on so much, right? Because that is true healing. Um, that's the actual, issue that we have at hand. And hormonal imbalance is such a profound, it's almost just like a commonality these days that, oh yeah, I have this hormone imbalance and I'm not doing anything about it. I'm being prescribed all these other medications that have all these gnarly side effects. And to me, it just doesn't make sense, right? So I think that's why it's huge and important for, I love what the FDA is doing. I love that it was all over the news. I love that all these, social media, influencers, providers are taking to social media and, again, just spreading the word, spreading the message. Um, you know, we are doing our part. We're here talking about it. Um, you know, we got to win for the estrogen tally.
We're just
Now
getting started.
now it's the
Yeah.
next thing, right? We got to move to the testosterone replacement therapy. In women, we're gonna have to do a full on episode about men. Men's hormone replacement therapy and the benefits that that's a whole nother ball game. But I do think that just with the timing of everything, um, I think it was important that we got out there and we helped, spread this word and this message. Um, that the science is clear, right? The timing is clear, and hormones are not the enemy, right? They're one of the most powerful tools that we have to protect our heart, our brain, preserve bone, stabilize mood, help, increase or optimize metabolism, and truly change the trajectory of aging. um so it's This isn't fringe. This isn't controversial, right? This is evidence based medicine that's just been buried and misunderstood and ignored for far too long. So I'm just super excited about what the future has to hold now that more and more people are coming around to this. Um,
You probably will, don't lie. But it's okay. I listen, I I think this is the moment, I think you had asked at some point along the lines, you asked why did it take so long or something like that, right? Why did it take so long for this to happen? And then you kind of answered your own question. It took so long because there's no money in this, right? For the FDA, there's no money, not even for the FDA, just for the system in general, right? There's not a lot of money in it to actually cure people and get people better. There's not a lot of money in that for them, right? They make more money by keeping people on medications and keeping people sick, and just enough that they can keep that person going and fulfilling that script on a monthly basis,
yeah.
and it's a shame. And I think especially with as it's going to be really interesting to see how this shifts this space of hormone replacement, because unfortunately I do think there's going to be a bit of a backlash or like a backswing of um, people are going to go to their primary cares and expect to get hormone replacement therapy prescribed by their primary cares, or they're going to go to their OB-GYNs and they're going to expect to get great bioidentical pellet therapy from their PCPs and OB-GYNs. And these types of providers, unless they have gone out of their way, unless they've intentionally gone out of their way for additional training, I would not send my worst enemy to those types of doctors for hormone replacement therapy management, because they are just not trained in it. And the amount of damage that I see created by that, either they significantly underdose because they're so scared and they don't know and they don't have protocols and they haven't done the research, so you don't get any benefits, or they massively overdose and do the wrong formulation. I've had women and I can give some war stories of that, right? I've seen women come through our doors that have been put on, 400 and 500 milligrams of progesterone to try to control breakthrough bleeding because it's just a nightmare of hormone chaos in there. And that's totally mismanagement of hormones. Or, I've seen, the men go in there and get testosterone replacement, but it's barely getting their total testosterone above 400. I mean, it's just so suboptimal, so not even having an impact. Um, or women going to OB-GYNs and getting put on oral estrogen and progesterone, and there's not even a discussion of testosterone, right? So I think the point is, and the point I'm trying to make is that it really, really matters in this world right now to work with people that have the experience, and not all doctors have that experience. And a good doctor that doesn't have the experience will tell you that they don't have the experience, but that's not always the case, right? And I think the other conversation to have here is around insurance coverage for these things. I think we need to talk about that at least briefly. You know, like we had talked about earlier, the FDA has approved a boatload of testosterone formulations for men. They have zero for women. So there's not a lot available on the commercial market. So if you're a woman wanting to get testosterone replacement in particular, you have to go through a compounding pharmacy, and you're not going to get insurance coverage, insurance participation for all these things. Right. So, I think that mindset needs to shift of how can I get all this stuff covered by insurance to how can I do this in an affordable way, but that's also safe and personalized and custom compounded to me. And that's intentional that we're in that space, right? There's just no option in the conventional space for this.
So Stephanie and I, along with our entire team at Nava Health, we've committed our lives' work to do it exactly that. Helping women and men navigate this transition with clarity, the data, the personalization. We're not here by just taking a guess. We're not here using outdated protocols. We're using modern, evidence-based bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. Designed to protect you, your long-term health, and not just patch short-term symptoms. Right. So just want to take the time to say, thank you for being here with us. Thank you for caring about your health, your longevity, and your future. And thank you for being a part of this movement to rewrite the narrative for the millions of women and others who have been impacted, who feel like they haven't been heard. This episode is for you guys, and for those who, um, you know, you're not crazy, right? We're here for you guys, and we want to continue to spread this word and help educate others, so that they can get this life changing, life saving therapy. We'll see you on the next episode of the Legacy and Longevity Podcast.
If today's conversation sparked something in you, here's what I want you to do right now. Pick one strategy, one insight, one small action you heard today, and commit to it this week. Excellence isn't built in moments. It's built in the daily decisions that compound over time. Remember, you're not just building a healthier body or a more successful career. You're building a legacy that will outlast you. And that starts with the standards you set today. Thanks for listening to the Legacy and Longevity Podcast. If this episode was valuable, first subscribe so you never miss an episode. Then leave us a review to help more people find these conversations. And finally, share it with someone who you think needs to hear it. Until next Tuesday, keep raising the bar, keep pushing your limits, and keep stacking days. I'm Zach Dansell. Your legacy starts now.